And let's finish the 13th chapter of The Mummy, the Will, and the Crypt by John Bellairs. The professor and Fergie drove up to the Squam house and met Mrs. Woodley, who they noticed was not only crazy, but also probably a witch, although Professor Childermass doesn't like to use that word. He found the the matchbox that he gave Johnny, and knows that he was there, and he and Fergie are assuming that Johnny went to the Staunton Herald estate to look around, and we'll pick up there. Johnny walked quickly along a dark, gravelly road that cut through great masses of trees. It led from Camp Chocora to the old estate, and it was a road that he remembered well. Passing through the deserted picnic grounds by dark, still Lake Chocorua had been strange. Although he had not been able to see the mountain itself, he had felt its looming presence. Johnny was surprised to find out what a good hiker he was. Maybe the week in October had done him some good. Whatever the reason, he had covered the 3 miles in a relatively short time. His head cold was still a problem, of course. Every now and then he had to set down his crowbar and fish his handkerchief out of his pocket so he could blow his nose. But he wasn't collapsing or anything. He felt strong and brave and purposeful, even though the fear of Mrs. Woodley hovered in the back of his mind. Johnny slowed down. He played the flashlight's pale beam along the left-hand side of the road as he searched for some little stone that marked the path to the ledge. Had he come too far? No. It was half buried in leaves. He felt a triumphant surge in his chest. He was doing it. He was on his way. Johnny turned onto the path and walked on, peering into the darkness as he went. It was easier to see through the trees now that they were bare. In the distance, he could make out the quaint, steep-gabled cottage and its Gothic doodads and carvings. Rushing toward it now, Johnny felt something cold hit his cheek. Snow! Oh, well, it wasn't coming down very hard. As Johnny tramped on, swinging the crowbar jauntily, the lodge drew closer and closer until finally he was standing before it. Johnny laughed. He felt like Hansel and Gretel at the old witch's cottage. The lodge was like that. A weird fairy tale house that an old witch might live in. What if he opened the door and found Mrs. Woodley standing there, grinning evilly at him? Johnny shuddered. He really did not like thoughts like that. After a quick, nervous look around, Johnny set the crowbar down next to the doorway. He played the flashlight beam along the row of carved stone wallflowers that ran along the lintel over the door. Which one had it been? Ah, that one with the hole in it. Standing on tiptoe, Johnny reached in and pulled out a small, old-fashioned key, fitted into the lock, heaved open the door. Then he picked up the crowbar and stepped inside. The room was as musty and dismal and empty as it had been before. Mr. Glomus leered down at him from his frame over the mantel, and for the 1000th time, Johnny thought about what a strange old coot he must have been. However, he had not come here to think about Mr. Glomus. He was here on business. Johnny examined the front of the fireplace. The smiling children with the cereal bowls gazed blandly down at him. One of those heads was the knob. 1, 2, 3. The third one from the right looked slightly worn. Cautiously, Johnny reached up and tried to twist the head. It moved. To his great delight, Johnny heard the grumbling of machinery, of hidden chains and counterweights. Slowly, inch by inch, the massive stone slab at the back of the hearth rose up. But then, quite suddenly, the noise stopped. The slab was stuck. By the light of the flashlight, Johnny could see a dark opening that was only about a foot high. Johnny sighed. He knelt and shuffled on his knees into the mouth of the fireplace to inspect the narrow opening. Could he fit through it? Well, he would have to. First, he slid the all-important crowbar into the opening as far as it would go. Then, with his flashlight in his hand, he flattened himself on the floor, wriggled forward over the sooty hearthstone, and squeezed himself through. On the other side, Johnny pulled himself to his feet. For a moment, he thought about searching for the lever that would make the slab go back down, but it occurred to him that he might want to come back this way, and if he closed the door, he might, for all he knew, be closing it for good. So Johnny brushed the soot off the front of his parka and picked up the crowbar once more. With the flashlight beam playing before him, he advanced into the dark, foul-smelling tunnel. Johnny moved forward through the dark. Suddenly, for no reason at all, he remembered his matchbox. He felt in his pockets. Oh no, it was gone. He had probably left it back at the inn. No time to go back now, though. He pressed on. And now, the fear of the Guardian began to creep over him. Inside his head, he heard Chad Glomus's horrible screams and remembered what he had said. Guardian might be anything. It might be a pool of moonlight on the floor, or a chair, or smoke drifting in the air. It will come for you if you get too close to the will. Johnny tried to laugh his fear off. He tried to believe what Fergie believed, and he told himself stubbornly that Chad's disappearance had been faked. He was rich and screwy, and right now he was probably drinking a gin and tonic in a bar in Bermuda. Anything was possible if you were rich, Johnny told himself. But then he thought of the things he had seen and heard when he was crouching under Mrs. Woodley's window, and the fear crept back, chilling him to the bone. Johnny kept walking. He went up 2 broad, shallow steps to the second level of the tunnel, till he finally saw far ahead the stout, nail-studded door that led to the crypt beneath the chapel. He stopped, listening for sounds. Nothing. The silence was complete and absolute. Nervously, he flashed the light to one side, and he jumped a foot. It had picked out a carved skeleton in the wall. A streak of ice ran over the carving, blocking out one of the figure's hollow eyes. Quickly, Johnny jerked the light away. He moved up to the door. The key hung out from a nail. Johnny had to use both hands to turn it in the keyhole. Finally, the lock clicked. Johnny shoved at the door. It moved in a few inches, and then stuck. It had hit something. He stuck his head through the crack and played the flashlight beam down. And then Johnny's blood froze. His eyes opened wide, and he felt fingers of fear clutching at his throat. Beyond the door lay a body. The body of a man in a yellow raincoat. His head was partially covered by a black rubber rain hat, and what Johnny saw made him very grateful that he could not see more. One of the man's arms was folded under him, the other was stretched out, and his hand was splayed flat on the floor. It was brown and withered, like the hand of a mummy. And that is the end of chapter 13.